The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm back again tonight to continue to call for action on the housing crisis that we are in, and in particular, one very tangible action that this government could take in lead up to the fall economic statement that's now, we know, is set to be announced a week from today. Now, as you know, Mr. Speaker, I've been pressing for 6 specific items to be included in the fall economic statement, including this one on the housing crisis. I want to start, though, by sharing the extent of the crisis that we are in and what it looks like in my community. First of all, when it comes to those who are living unsheltered, between 2018 and 2021, the number of folks living unsheltered tripled from just over 300 to just over 1,000. In the more recent 3 years, we just had our point and count study in my community complete a few weeks ago. Well, it almost tripled again. The number of folks living unsheltered now up to over 2,300, and that's likely an underestimation. Meanwhile, house prices, those are 8 times median income today. Back in 2005, they were around 3 times median annual income. That's because house prices have gone up almost 300%. Rents have doubled. Wages, meanwhile, haven't caught up in any way. They have only gone up 42%. Meanwhile, in my community, research shows that we are leading the country in the number of affordable housing that we are losing. We lose 39 units of previously affordable housing for every 1 new unit built. And when it comes to government investments in housing, well, it's gotten to the point where in Ontario, 93% of affordable homes were built prior to 1995, back when both federal and provincial governments in Ontario and this federal government of various stripes invested in affordable housing at the scale that is required. It's part of why I've been pushing for a number of items, including doubling the social housing stock with ambitious federal investments similar to the way we used to see in the 1970s and even into the 80s. I've been calling to have this government fix the definition of housing that CMHC is using so that affordable housing dollars go towards building truly affordable housing, and an end to the tax exemptions for large corporate landlords like real estate investment trusts. Tonight, though, I want to speak specifically, because I know in this House there's been a lot of talk about Habitat for Humanity. Well, Habitat for Humanity has one specific call. They want to see parliamentarians support ending HST so they can build more affordable homes. Last fall, this government gave an HST exemption to for-profit developers of rental units, a helpful measure to address the housing crisis. But left out were non-profit affordable home ownership builders like Habitat. In my community on Keele Street, a Habitat home build site built 45 homes. They would have had an extra $1 million had this measure been in place to build more affordable units. In fact, they estimate for every 100 homes built, Habitat says they could build an additional 5 to 20 homes if they were exempt from this. It's why I sent a letter about this back on October 25th to the Ministers of Finance and Housing. I asked about it in question period on November 1st. Didn't get an answer then. I got a reply to my letter on November 12th, directed me to ask the question of the Minister of Finance. I did that earlier today at the Industry Committee. Didn't receive an answer there either. What I've put forward as well is we could actually pay for this measure if only we got rid of that tax exemption for the REITs. That's what we could use to pay for removing the HST for Habitat if we only had the REITs pay their fair share. So my question tonight is, will the Parliamentary Secretary at least share where the government stands on this important measure?
Parliamentary Secretary.
Well, let me begin, Mr. Speaker, by focusing on what we agree on. And I have a lot of respect for the colleague, in large part, because he always raises issues relating to vulnerable Canadians. He began his speech, by talking about those who are unhoused. And you have in place a government that hears him, that sees the issue in Canada and is responding, Mr. Speaker. A few moments ago, I did talk about encampments in Canada, how the federal government has put $250 million towards ensuring that people are taken out of camps and sheltered and ultimately put into stable housing. There's other examples I could point to relating specifically to the issue that he raised. I'm not unsympathetic to the idea that we need to support not-for-profits, and we do, Mr. Speaker. We do in a variety of ways, as you know, through low-interest loans, for example. I'm thinking specifically of he talked about initiatives in his home community. In my community of London, I'm thinking about the Vision Soho project, a great housing project that's going to see hundreds of people housed, including people who have very difficult and acute needs, people who have experienced deep trauma, physical abuse, sexual abuse, trauma that has led to them being on the street and addicted to all sorts of unfortunate things, Mr. Speaker, when it comes to drug or alcohol addiction. The wraparound supports that will be available are there. The organizations that made this possible secured a low-interest loan of around 3%, and that's not uncommon, Mr. Speaker. Working with CMHC, not-for-profits can do that. What they can also do by working with the federal government is obtain access to grants. Grants is something that allows for housing to be built. I emphasize built because that's what the federal government takes care of. We work on the capital side, ensuring that homes are built. We do ask, and I look to provinces especially on this, the operating dollars when it comes to supportive housing for those facing those particular challenges is real. And of course, not-for-profits are taking care of the ultimate administration, the execution of these programs, Mr. Speaker, and municipalities have a role to play too. He talked about the high cost of rent. Of course, we know that's an issue in Canada, and we did lift GST costs on the construction of apartments. We did so for a specific reason. Interest rates have been very high. Labor costs, rather, have been high. Construction costs have been high. We needed to do it, and now you see cranes across the country building homes for Canadians. You add to supply, you bring down costs, Mr. Speaker. Thank you very much.
The honourable member for Kitchener Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And I want to start by saying thank you to the Parliamentary Secretary for adding some substance to this conversation. I think that's what debate in Parliament is supposed to be about. But it continues to be the case that I just do not understand when this government removed GST from for-profit builders of rental housing. Maybe they just forgot that there were other non-profit affordable home ownership builders like Habitat. Well, Habitat has come around and shared this oversight with the government. I think that would be a kind assessment. Maybe it was an oversight. The government recognizes we are in a housing crisis. There are nonprofit affordable homeownership builders like Habitat who are ready and waiting to build more, likely in his community and certainly in mine. Now that the government understands this and Habitat has met with them as well, why is it not just kind of more obvious that this is a measure that's important to take up, and why haven't we seen it done yet?
The Honourable Parliamentary Secretary.
There are different ways to get to the same results, Mr. Speaker, the results that we all want. I talked about low-interest loans. A low-interest loan to a not-for-profit of around 3% is very, very significant considering the current economic context, Mr. Speaker. I talked about grants that are available, and they certainly are, Mr. Speaker, through the Affordable Housing Program and other initiatives of this federal government. I talked about also how the GST lift, taking GST off of the construction costs of apartments, will add to supply. We have vacancy rates in this country hovering around 0% in many communities. That's unacceptably low, Mr. Speaker. We need a vacancy rate that's between 3 and 5%. And with high interest rates, we needed to do something to incent the private sector. That has done it. If I had more time, Mr. Speaker, and I realize, I promise you I don't, I know that I don't, rather, I would have talked about the Housing Accelerator Fund and the systemic change that it's leading to by zoning changes and other things to make home ownership a real opportunity. We have more to do, Mr. Speaker, but I'm excited about the prospects ahead because we are serious about this.